coming up next. Stay tuned to learn more about the state of the art in blockchain and cryptocurrency technology. Reimagine 2020.
I'm Behrens. I'm heading the Daimler Mobility blockchain factory, and I'm very glad to be part of Reimagine 2020 and happy to talk to you.
Hey everybody, it is Patrick McLain here, one of your hosts for Reimagine 2020. We're continuing the 72-hour journey with another guest, and again, I think we've had a few of these conversations, and these are the conversations that I think are really interesting. On one side of the spectrum, I think we have use cases in blockchain, right? The DeFi, the currencies, et cetera, which we kind of know those have taken off, right? And then we have another half of this promise, which is, what does blockchain do, right? Like, how can blockchain benefit the world? How can blockchain benefit businesses, governments, institutions? So I really enjoy the conversations where we get, key players, like we're going to hear from in a minute from Harry. But Harry, before I go on too long, go ahead and introduce yourself and maybe tell everybody a little bit about how you got into blockchain.
Oh, thank you. So I'm Harry Behrens, and so I got into blockchain about in the year 2012, just simply because it's obviously a very disruptive technology. It basically blurs the lines between finance, business, and software. And that's when I started getting involved in it. Within Daimler Mobility, so formerly called Daimler Financial Services, I basically took it upon me to evangelize the technology. At that point in time, nobody knew what blockchain even was. So I had to start by explaining what is blockchain and how does it work. And it's not an easy thing to explain, believe me. But the long story short, since 2018, September, I got the honor and the pleasure of heading the Daimler Mobility blockchain factory, which is a team dedicated to bringing the technology into the company and applying it to the best business needs that we may have.
Awesome. So, and I want to kind of pivot there to in a minute to the Daimler blockchain factory. But before we go there, do you mind kind of walking me through a little bit? Like, what was your past like before you got into blockchain? Like, what were the experiences that you had? What kind of made you well suited, and like, why do you think that this is an area of interest for you?
Well, I'm a software guy through and through. So I did my master's, a diploma, it's called in German, in computer science with a minor in economics. Did my master's on neural networks. So nowadays you'll be calling it deep learning. Then I went to Japan, worked in Japan, did my PhD in Japan, again on artificial intelligence, in that case, what's called expert systems. And all that time, I basically did each and every possible job that you can imagine in networks, software, consulting, always focused on distributed logic. So I thrive when it comes to communication protocols. For a while, I had my own voice of IP company. I first worked for a phone company, then did a managed buyout of the software, got into leveraging the protocols. So I believe in protocol economy, and I've always believed in protocol economy, and I've always believed that software needs to be put at the service of business. So that's pretty much of the background. I've only worked for small companies most of my life. I joined Daimler Mobility in China, of all places, 5 years ago. Then I graduated through their whole being part of their IT infrastructure. I was heading their mobility IT department there for a while, was an interim CTO for Car2Go in China. And through that kind of apply software, apply protocols, apply distributed systems to the way business should be done. That's kind of what kind of naturally brought me towards how blockchain, which is the quintessential decentralized software, could be of high importance and high disruptive potential.
Very, very well said. It seems like you have no lack of expertise. I think especially when people look at distributed systems, right, they don't understand the nuance of kind of, how servers are deployed or how machines talk to each other, with levels of trust, and whether that's due to latency or, right, just being across, different geographical regions or, kind of moving data in efficient ways. So can you tell me, like, what is a Daimler blockchain factory, and like what is it, maybe one interesting point of like where you think your guys' approach is different than maybe some of your competitors or other people you see in the industry?
Well, I put it this way. Most of the people that are interested in blockchain look at it primarily as a financial system, something that you use for cryptocurrency, something that you use for currency transfer, something that you use to create coins, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's by far the biggest application. But what we're doing is, I would call it industrial blockchain. So we look at blockchain and distributed ledger technology as the perfect technology to do transactions, service transactions between decentralized participants. So basically companies that do not share the same accounting systems, that do not share the same infrastructure, but you want to make it possible for them to interact meaningfully and most of all in commercial transactions, i.e. there's consent agreement, there's terms and conditions, and then at the end of it, there is a billing record, and based on the billing records, there's an invoice, there's a payment, and everybody gets booked that invoice into their respective copy of the ledger. And in order to do that in the area of automotive, in the area of IoT, you always need to converge it with the IoT smart devices, because a lot of your true data that you will ultimately be booking and be basing your distributed ledger booking on is coming from devices such a car. How many kilometers did I drive? How long was I utilized? What fuel consumption did I have? Or for charging stations, how much electricity just did I give this car? And the convergence of digital identities for people, customer, for companies, and for devices is key to that, because only based on digital identities can you provide truly valid digital signatures. And only if you have truly digital signatures in place can you actually make a smart contract what it's supposed to be, and not just like software on ledger. And we basically concern ourselves with creating totally hyper-automated distributed transaction systems where a lot of the transaction logic is handled fully automatically, and we handle mainly those part of the transactions which is specifically not use case specific. So anybody needs consent agreement. Offer with a signature, terms and conditions, accept with a signature, put a timestamp to it, commit it to the blockchain, run the consensus protocol. This is now irrefutable, indisputable, no way out of it. Then as you move along, you have a rental, provide the billing record, GPS, route, distance, fuel, provide that cryptographically signed by an identity empowered hardware device. So afterwards, there's also no dispute possible. How long was the car driven, etc., because you get it straight out of the car and you get it signed off with a digital identity into your blockchain. And then at the end of that whole little cycle, you do distributed ledger. You actually do what blockchain was born to do. You book it, but you do double bookkeeping. You don't do like what blockchain originated. It does a single leg of a transaction, namely the payment. Any commercial transaction in the business environment always got two legs: deliver the service, pay the money. And that is basically what I would call industrial blockchain. And that's what we focus on. So we are very far away from cryptocurrencies. We're very far away from the whole big finance game. We apply it as a network to conduct business among people, companies, and devices.
Well, and I think it's a really interesting point. And we were talking a minute before, like I'm lucky enough to do a little bit, like I talk to corporations or enterprises, right? So I'm always intrigued by the conversations and the different way, corporations kind of approach it or enterprises approach it. And IoT is a very interesting part, right? I have a background a long time ago in RFID, NFC systems, right? So I know a little bit about kind of sensors or, kind of resembling what a digital identity is or binding it to a physical item. And I think it's a point people miss, right? I think sometimes people think of blockchain, like I hear so many people sometimes say trust in supply chain. And I've come to look at them and say, it's not really trust, right? Like you already have systems. Most people in supply chain already have systems in place to like what they think is to validate something, right? But that isn't the point. They really need to verify it, right? And when you put a human in the middle, right, or you put a non-standard or non-verifiable or right, what's a signature or somebody to mess with it, you kind of add this extra leg. Where I think a lot of sensors, what I appreciate about them in blockchain is that they don't have any bias, right? Like they're purely passers of data, and right, and so the net is what we get, right? So it kind of leads me. Can you tell me a little bit of like how was Daimler and what you've seen at the blockchain garage? Like how was that journey for you guys? Like if you go back to like your first use cases, right? Like I'm sure you ran into some roadblocks. Can you kind of take me through from the beginning to where you guys are at now? Maybe some lessons you learned?
Well, the lessons are, first of all, when you deal with blockchain, think big, because there is no other way. So we started off by designing a platform which we had more or less designed to cover our very specific business, which is the business of wholesale and retail finance. And we built the platform as a vehicle lifecycle product, a distributed ledger that captures all the financial applications around that. But we limited the focus to the actual and specific business partners, the dealers, the brand partners, and us, and designed the platform to do that. The part about blockchain that makes it interesting is it applies where you have a highly heterogeneous market. So where there's a lot of interaction between a lot of independent partners, there it is very valuable. You do not really need it if anyway you're acting within the trust zone of one company. There is very little need for blockchain. So look for the markets or look for situations that are highly fragmented, where there's many, many players, and the business is done by the combination of a lot of independent players. That is where the real bang for the buck lies with blockchain. Stay away from trying to do blockchain within your vertical silo. Yes, you can do a proof of concept, but probably what you're doing there can be done with other recent and reasonably well-designed software, and probably can be done easier and cheaper, because it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to train your software engineers and more even your business people to understand what the hell blockchain is. It's not an easy thing to understand. So only apply it to where it's really needed. And that would be, find yourself a situation, if you want to apply blockchain, find a fragmented, decentralized market. And on the other side, if you're within a company, ask yourself, when somebody tries to sell you blockchain as a technology, ask yourself, do I really need it? And make sure whenever you have one company or two companies or three companies only involved, you probably do not need blockchain. So that's a lesson I definitely learned, and it makes life easier now, because now I'm much better in expectation management. So I'm more upfront when I talk to people. When it comes clear they want to have blockchain because it's sexy, and it turns out they don't really need it, I feel much more relaxed and explaining to them, you probably do not need blockchain.
Well, and I think that's part of something that's always made me laugh. Right? I've been in technology since I've been a programmer since I was a kid. Tech companies pretty much my whole life, and this technology has always kind of like stood out. Right? It's like it's not 100%. It's controversial, right? Like even from its like birth, right? Like in every way, it was like maybe blockchain got bound to cryptocurrency, right? And then like cryptocurrency had its own like set of controversial points. I think people have kind of approached it differently for that reason. And like, it can't just be a technology. There has to be these other elements bolted onto it. Right. I think at one point you just said, which I think is interesting, where you're saying if you're using it for an internal use case, you're probably getting a little farther away from where a immutable ledger really makes sense, right? Or you really need to implement signatures, but that starts to make more sense as you get to where you have multiple parties that you want to kind of either they want to all validate the data, maybe they want one shared source of truth, or you want to be able to kind of interact with multiple partners in a place where you don't own the software, right? And you kind of want to be able to jump in the middle, right, without kind of fitting the whole model. But what has your experience been between multiple partners? So when you approach a project in blockchain and you need multiple partners buy-in, what have you kind of learned about how to best approach that situation when you need to kind of get sign off from everyone?
Well, that takes me to actually my favorite topic right now in the area of blockchain, which is decentralized platforms, co-opetition, and generally how do you design mechanisms by which multiple parties that have possibly contradicting incentives in the sense they are competitors, but how do you get them to use a common platform? How is that even possible? And if you look at what happened in technology, and if you look at it from the European angle, so, or the German angle, so you basically see that Europe, Germany lagged far behind in everything that's called platform economics, meaning huge software systems that basically become their marketplaces, achieve economies of scale through network effects, and then can basically cover a whole market, be it, for instance, Airbnb, be it Amazon, be it one of those, and do that very conveniently based on pure technology. We lagged behind that. However, here in Germany, especially in the industrial world, we have identified that this is obviously needed. There will be something like this, not only in the B2C sector, like we know them now, there will be platforms in the B2B sector, in how one industrial partner deals with another industrial partner, with our suppliers, they have their suppliers, then there's customers in the middle. So there will emerge B2B platforms. Now, how do you bring these people onto a shared platform? It's very hard to do, first of all, the simple thing, technically, because in order to integrate my IT infrastructure with your IT infrastructure and everybody else's IT infrastructure, either I do point-to-point IT integration projects, and those are painful, believe me, especially for corporates who add layers of complexity in order to do that, or somebody comes from the outside and basically provides a so-called neutral platform. But then what we're risking is that the platform provider in turn, basically by being the one owner of the platform, ends up owning the whole platform and then being able to dictate terms, which is not good for somebody in the industry. I mean, one example I always use is Uber takes 25% of the revenue of their drivers, take or leave a little bit. That is something no value-add industrial player in Northern Europe would be able to survive. It's not something that we can accept. So how do you then design a platform in a decentralized way? Technically, blockchain is perfect. It takes away a lot of the integration effort. In a nutshell, everybody gets himself a node, downloads the node, I'm simplifying now, downloads the image, boots the image up, goes drink a coffee or goes for a weekend, and then the node is part of the network. And that was pretty much, very simplified, the whole integration needed. But now how do you make sure this can be governed in a way that me and my competitor are happy to join this platform? And I believe the only answer to that is collaborative platforms or co-opetition, where basically the platform should be co-owned and co-controlled by those that deliver the supply and the business on that platform. Why? Well, think of how Visa did it, or think of how traditionally in German some of the conglomerates do it. Basically, we need to have a balance between the platform thriving and making money, but on the other hand, avoiding A, the danger that the platform can dictate terms, and B, that none of the individual players can be dominant on the platform, because then the other players will be reluctant to join it. And the only way you can do that is everybody has a non-controlling share of the platform. Everybody is part of the control and the governance, but nobody on their own has in any way blocking possibility, veto possibility, or even controlling possibility. And this whole topic of decentralized platforms is something that kind of tends naturally to converge out of blockchain once you understand what blockchain really is. Blockchain is a decentralized business unit. At the end of the day, a distributed ledger is, let's not go as far as saying DAOs, as in distributed autonomous organizations, but it gives you the capabilities to run a lot of what a company needs to run in a highly distributed manner, very efficiently. So it allows you to create business networks where companies can interact in a form that is neither competition nor collaboration or cooperation, but rather a merging of all. And this is where I see, in Europe at least, a strong tendency and a strong trend that the industry is going to ultimately converge towards these decentralized platforms, because it's the best way to benefit from platform economics and network effects, but avoiding the danger of having one rent extracting monopoly, basically dictating terms and absorbing most of the value add that currently still we keep in our own pockets.
I just heard a really interesting perspective from you, and I think I had talked to enough people, so I try to pick it up. And like, so, on one side, you sound very technical, and that I think that comes out clear to me, and I think for anyone watching. And again, there's probably, I don't know, 3,000-4,000 students watching this, this interview right now. For the students listening, like, listen to what Harry is saying, right? Like, I think this is what you need to understand as you think about building applications, right? Like, I think in one half of the world, there's a little bit of anarchism in the crypto or the blockchain space. Everybody just wants to go their own route, and they want decentralized finance, and they don't want to burn down banks and screw corporations, right? On the other half, it's like, no, like when we think about blockchain, like how do we prove it at scale, right? Everybody built this technology. Well, you know what they don't have? They don't have mounds of data kind of proving what they built, right? And I think that's going to be something that we need to continue. It's the only way we're going to get better, right? Like any company building blockchain platforms needs that feedback to really improve, right? And I think companies like Daimler, right, and kind of across the board have operations at scale to kind of prove that. So, the next interesting point, which I'm hearing, and I'm actually really intrigued, is, so on one hand, it sounds, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you're a technologist, but then you also kind of sound like a little bit of a diplomat, right? Like you can't just approach this from like the most efficient. There's probably moments where you're like, this would be the most efficient way to do it, but you have to kind of balance multiple parties' interests. And in some cases, they might not be logical to whatever, from whatever perspective you're designing it. Do you think that's unique to technology? I mean, obviously you've been around the block. Like, have you experienced many technologies where you feel like that power balance or that balancing people's interests is really taken into consideration so highly?
Well, I put it this way: for the first time, since blockchain comes out, it's been perfectly condensed into one very simple word, which is a highly technical term for those who need to implement it, but which is a very, you call it diplomatic term, for those who practice it and who those achieve it in the real world. And the term is consensus. So on blockchain, obviously, the whole clue about blockchain is that it achieves distributed consensus based on a lot of highly developed cryptography. But the term consensus, as in its normal meaning, it means we simply agree on a balance here, and we agree on a shared truth, which we are willing to accept, and based on which we are willing to continue, and based on which we are willing to invoice ourselves, discuss, etc. So the term consensus is beautifully reflected in the way blockchain or distributed ledger handle decentralized business. And because it is by essence designed to achieve consensus among the participants, at the end of the day, it becomes necessary to keep that consensus in the old-fashioned word, cyber-physical gap, because at the end of the day, for the time being, there's companies or entities or people who now need to use this, and they also need to have consensus on how this needs to be run on the meta level. The governance also needs consensus. And doing the governance consensus on the technical level, I believe, to my opinion, misses a little bit of a point. It was the attempt to do that which led to the distributed autonomous organizations, the DAO. I believe a DAO is a little bit like art for art's sake, or rather technology for technology's sake. It doesn't make sense. Some things are best done on the human level because humans are the ones that benefit and humans are the ones that make the money. And some things are best left to the technology because it's simply best done. And blockchain has this beautiful, seamless transition where consensus is consensus is consensus at each level. And that makes it a technical topic, it makes it a philosophical topic, it makes it a financial topic. That's what I love about the technology.
I love it. So one last question, and I want to pivot to a little bit about maybe in more detail after how Daimler's thinking about blockchain. What are some of the use cases you guys are seeing that are really interesting to you? But a few things you said, and something I kind of consistently see is, I see a lot of corporations where it's like, maybe I feel like there are different phases. Like I feel like a lot of people kind of dip their toe in the water, right? They didn't fully commit, and what does this cause them? I think like to a certain extent it causes them pain. Like they probably spend more money than usual on pilots. the pilots are more cumbersome. They take harder time to deploy, and it kind of leaves the internal organizations like not a bad taste in their mouth, but like probably a sense that it's more complicated or more resource intensive than it should be. In the end, I think if you do it right, I think, you know, from the platform perspective, you know, there's a lot of companies that kind of came up in the blockchain space since, let's say, 2017, 2018, who have kind of outwardly proposed their angle towards enterprises, whether they've really delivered on those promises or not. Right, where I feel like they engage a lot of corporations. Maybe they had one person they dealt with, right? There was like one internal evangelist. So they're kind of going down the path of a pilot. Well, maybe that person left, right? And the pilot kind of fell apart. Or maybe there's a consortium of multiple parties, right? Where maybe one party kind of showed up late, right? And they ended up feeling a little bit slighted, like their interests weren't as put to the forefront of some of the people that came before them. You know, how are you guys thinking about that? And are you guys thinking of blockchain as something that you're going to build into your business processes from now to the future? Or is it something that you're still kind of trying to figure out if it will work for you? Have you gone all the way in? Have you dove all the way in?
Well, the best advice I can give, and that's how we do it, keep focus. Blockchain is a very wide topic. It has the potential to disrupt almost any type of business. So obviously, if you don't keep focus, you're going to want to do this, you want to do that, want to do this. You're going to jump from one POC to the next, and in the end, you're going to do nothing because the POC dies. You're going to jump to the next POC, nothing remains. So we kept our focus, kept our eye on the ball. We are in the mobility business, we are in the fleet business, and we're in the automotive financing business. We build based on blockchain where it makes sense. Blockchain and the converged technologies such as IoT, telematics, connected car, plus the digital identity that are needed to conduct the business. We use these three converged technologies and we apply them to our current business and our future business, preferably for the future business, because of course the existing business is running on systems that are based on traditional way of doing business. And the biggest problem or the biggest challenge in applying blockchain, and that's another lesson I've learned, is it is not an improvement of something. It is not an evolution of something. It is not that you're doing it in a better way now that you got blockchain. Fortunately and unfortunately, it's a completely new paradigm. So it turns things upside down, so it doesn't mesh well with existing ways of doing business. So it doesn't mesh well with legacy systems. It doesn't mesh well with legacy business models. It doesn't mesh very well with legacy business processes. So apply it to future business that are thought digitally from the ground up, and you can reap incredible economies of scale and incredibly efficiencies. And that is what you do. Keep your focus on your market. If you have a market, stay within that market, because probably in that market, you're better than the others. If you want to enter a new market, there's probably players there that are better than you because they've been in that market for years. So stick to our market, apply it where it makes sense, be very, very stringent on the quality of software, build it from the ground up, make no compromises on the software architecture, make it clean, and always focus on the identities and the signatures. Essentially, all you're doing is you're handling signatures and statements and facts signed by identified parties, and then you use the blockchain to achieve consensus that whatever fact, statement, contract signature you have just collected is indeed agreed upon by all parties. And because it's so distributed, you then have the ability to hyper-automate that across horizontal scales, which so far are simply unimaginable. So in a nutshell, focus on your core business, but apply it to the future version of your core business. Think your business new from the ground up, because blockchain does things radically different from the way before, but still focus on your future market. And that's when you can see real benefits, and stop doing POCs. POCs are out, I can only say that. 2017 was the last time I would have been willing to do POC based on blockchain. If somebody asks you to do POC now, you're wasting your time and the time of whoever's asking you to do the POC.
For the thousands of people that are watching, for I know the 100+ universities, all the students, kind of the general public, this is one of those moments where I keep looking at the clock and I'm like, dude, I wish I had 2 more. We could probably go for 2 more hours, Me and Harry have not even scratched the surface of a conversation. I already know this, but I unfortunately we have about 5 minutes right now. So let's cram it in. Part of what we're trying to do here is, again, I'm telling you, one of the things that always intrigues me is, you know, I live in multiple circles where it's like I work and I have founders, a bunch of people who've like quote unquote been in blockchain for a while. Maybe they've invested in projects or the ICO phase, right? I think there's like a lot of this carryover that might spill over into blockchain from the crypto world or whatever, right? And I find there's like a lot of times there's pessimism, right? Where people have kind of maybe been waiting for some promise they thought should have been delivered sooner. I've kind of taken a different, you know, approach. As we were talking before the call, I was letting you know, like, we have a big engineering arm, and it's like, I've learned, like, this is not easy to build, right? Like, and it shouldn't be. Like, the decentralized future, like, it's to keep data in sync between decentralized devices that all trust each other without a central authority is not a easy thing to build, right? So I truly believe that that should take time. Does that mean that we could have moved faster? Maybe. But when I get on a call with like 50 university students, right? Like 19 to 23-year-olds, they don't have this pessimism, right? They're like, I'm going to build an application and I'm going to build a decentralized application. So I try to always tell people, like, I know what's coming up behind, right? Because I see this army of really smart kids. They don't know that they can't do this, right? So I kind of see. But so for the students listening, and obviously you have a pretty in-depth career, you've seen a lot of things, from neural networks to what forms of machine learning, you know, kind of very like computational and data-driven, you know, experiences. For a student today who's like maybe going to graduate or kind of going in, you know, their career path or looking at how they want to kind of approach blockchain, what advice would you give to them? Like, if you were to go back in time and like you're in school today, like, how would you think about blockchain?
Well, blockchain gives you freedom in many ways. If you apply it right, it was built out of crypto-anarchistic, in the positive way, motivations. It was built to set people free originally. If you read the whole history of Satoshi Nakamoto, if you look at the Genesis block and why the Genesis block refers to what it's referring to, it's an anarchistic technology. It's an anarchistic statement. And now it's been captured also by corporates, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But whenever you apply something like blockchain or any technology, if you want to learn, be playful. So do this and do that, there's no harm done. But if you think you're building a business and you want to get investors, or you want to be successful in the monetary sense, or even in the sense of realizing whatever your dream is, do not focus on the technology. Focus on the purpose, whatever your purpose may be. It may be to solve the problem of decentralized finance. It may be to solve the problem of provenance. It may be to solve the problem of voting. I don't know, whatever your purpose is. And then apply yourself to the purpose and think of, no matter how cool the technology is a tool. It's a mechanism. Mechanisms come and go. Purposes should pretty much be fairly absolute. So my advice is always master the technology, but focus on your purpose, because only that will keep you true to your actual goal, and only that will ultimately make you successful in whatever terms you personally measure your success.
I'm telling you, I'm sad I have to end this. Like, I almost know for a fact this probably won't be the last time that you and I talk. And we have some panels coming up later this week with a few other, I think, key industry players, people I've got to know pretty well. We'll send out maybe an invite or a separate correspondence if you have a few minutes.
Sure.
I think you might be interested in it. But again, whether you're a student, a general technology person, like, listen to what Harry is saying, right? And I can't rephrase this again. Like, we need about
Stay tuned to learn more about the state of blockchain education at major universities all around the world. Reimagine 2020.